Hi, this is Robin, and this workshop today is focused on how to use three different types of Photoshop adjustment layer options to convert full color photographs to black and white. I'm not going to be talking about third-party plugins, partly because I think that the Photoshop tools that I'm going to demonstrate will offer you more artistic control. So we're just going to stay with what Photoshop includes as options for conversions. Before I start the demo of the three Photoshop tools that I use and am recommending that you try or use, I'd like to set some groundwork for this and some definitions. So another term for black and white image is a monochrome. And if we break that down into the two parts, mono means single or one, and chrome means color or hue. And you might find that I will use those terms color and hue interchangeably throughout this video, but if I do use the different terms, I'm using them to mean the same thing. Now, all black and white images are monochrome, but not all monochrome images are black and white. So I'm sure you've seen sepia, which is a yellowish tannish color, cyans or cyanotypes that are blue. Van Dyke brown is another type of popular monochrome, and you can use any other kind of tint, so it just goes on and on. But black and white images are comprised strictly of the neutrals that span the full tonal range from pure black through the different shades of gray to pure white. So if you do decide to overlay a single shade of a single color over your black and white image, it will still be a monochrome because the black is a neutral. Now, I suppose you could say, well, why should we even create black and white photographs? It's not like the old days and we have cameras that capture beautiful color. Well, black and white certainly is not the reality we all experience every day. We see the world in full color, at least those of us who aren't blind or colorblind do. And therefore, if we're making black and white images and photographs, then we're purposely choosing to do so. It's a very purposeful way, I think, to be artistic and expressive, or to make some kind of statement or create a dramatic or classic looking, because it will look like those old photographs type of image. So I think your goal when you're making a black and white photo should be to have no distractions in the photo, because again, you don't have the color for somebody to get caught up in. The subject becomes paramount, becomes the key. So that's something to keep in mind when you want to choose which photos to use to convert to black and white. And so springboarding off of that, just because all color photos can be converted to black and white doesn't mean that all color photos will make effective black and white images. What I've found is that the color photos that work best in black and white have lots of contrast and tonal variation to them, even if you see them in the color form. They tend to have distinctive shadows and light. Or interesting textures, which could just be looked at as another form of contrast, honestly. And they almost all have very clean, discernible shapes and or lines. There's not a lot of clutter of little details in the really effective black and white images that I've seen. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Whether the colors are kind of not as impactful, the picture will look better in black and white, but it's only if it has those other characteristics too, not just turn a bad color photograph into a excellent black and white. It's not necessarily going to translate that way. And I'm going to take a quick sip here because my voice is going today. Excuse me for that. Okay, so I know for me, and I don't know about for you, it's not that easy for everyone to see in air quotes in black and white. So if you can't visualize that way, what I recommend and what I do when shooting is to set your camera to simultaneously capture both a raw image and a monochrome or black and white JPEG. Different cameras classify it differently. Some say monochrome, some say black and white. So whatever is right for your camera. But the important thing is to use both the raw and the monochrome or black and white JPEG to capture the same image at the same moment. RAW will capture your scenes in full color, and that's what you should use to process and convert from from color to black and white in Photoshop. The JPEG monochrome that you'll be shooting is strictly a visualization tool to help you see what works and what won't in black and white. So definitely don't try to process that JPEG monochrome, because what happens with JPEGs is they're already fully processed by your camera, so you won't be able to do anything creative with such a file. So just something to keep in mind is, or to try and see if it helps you to see which of your shots in the world will look better as black and whites. So just as an example of that, here's a shot of mine that I shot at an equestrian event. And, it's not bad as a color picture here. I mean, you can clearly see there's a horse and a rider, and they're in the middle of a jump, and, it's in a kind of a scenic wood area. But as an image that would be something to convert to a black and white, I can just see now, knowing that this is not going to work very well, because if you look at the shade or the tones of the greens and the brown and the shirt and the boots and everything, and all aspects of the jump other than the whites, they're all the same tonal value, so it's all going to mush together, and there's way too many details going on. So the main subjects, which is this right in here, are just going to get lost. So let me just quickly show you. Oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong button there. Go to adjustment layer, and I'm going to hit on black and white. How about that? And you can see, so it's exactly what I said. So all the details just kind of blend together because there isn't enough tonal variation, there isn't enough contrast, there's just too much going on, and your eye just gets drawn to these bright whites. So my suggestion to you is, if you can't do the shooting thing that I said during the capture, that'll help you figure out what to make a good black and white, just quickly do something like this and do a quick conversion. And if your image does not look good and there aren't distinctive shapes and distinctive subjects in black and white, don't use it as a black and white. Keep it in color. If you're trying to find something for a competition or for a club entry, a photo club entry, or something like that, find something that will be a lot more impactful. Something like this is not a good picture to make into a black and white. If it won't work, don't use it. Find another image that will. Okay, so let me move on and open up one of the images I'm going to use to demonstrate. But before I get into the demonstration, first of all, what I want to do is I've customized my Photoshop interface. So I just always like to give people a quick tour so you know where to look when I'm talking about tools to use. So I've docked my toolbar on the right, my layers panel is up here at the top, and my properties panel is down here at the bottom. So your tools might be on the left and these two might be reversed view. So just, when I say to go to different places, that's why I'm going someplace different than what you might have on your computer, your setup. So I am going to demonstrate how to make color to black and white conversions using 3 different methods. So using this image here, I'm going to use a black and white adjustment layer. The second demo, I will use a gradient map adjustment layer plus a selective color adjustment layer, and that I'm going to use a portrait for that. And then in the final demo, I'm going to use the channel mixer adjustment layer for a landscape image. And my point is, you can use any of these tools that you feel comfortable with using. I don't think you're necessarily one's going to be better than another, and I just want to show you that they can be used on a variety of genres of pictures. It's not like one has to be used for one type of picture and one has to be used for another. Before I show you the tools I suggest that you do use, I want to warn you against using some other tools that are available in Photoshop and that I don't think you want to be using. They will not work well for you. So the first one I suggest not to use is if you go to the top of your interface to Image and down to Adjustments and over, you'll see something right here that says desaturate, and that sounds like it's going to take the color out of your image. Do not use this. Do not use this. Because what this is going to do is Photoshop's going to give you what it thinks should be a black and white, and you can't adjust it at all to your own taste. You will take all creative control away from you. So do not use image adjustments desaturate. In fact, I would warn you against using any of these tools under image adjustments because they're destructive. There are comparable tools in the adjustments panel, and I'd suggest you use those in general. The other tool I suggest that you do not use for color to black and white adjustments is Adobe Camera Raw Profiles, and you can either come into them directly when you open a raw image or under your filter menu in Photoshop, the Camera Raw filter, and this will look exactly like what that Adobe Camera Raw filter will look like, so I can show you here. Avoid using the profiles, so do not use black and white or black and white profiles here. Do not use them because, again, it's going to bake in some choice and you have less flexibility of how you can adjust your image. So stay away from those two things. Okay. So let me get into the first demo of the first tool that I do want to show you and suggest that you consider using, and that is a black and white adjustment layer. And because you're not going to be working with the photos that I have here, I just want to tell you my rationale for why I thought this would make a good or an effective black and white image and why I want to work with it and try it. So there is tonal variety in here. You can see there's lighter, brighter, and darker tones in this image. There's also very good, strong contrasts between the lights and the darks and the shadows and things like that, and the shapes. There's good shapes in here, and it's not a busy image. So that was my rationale for why I picked this image as one I want to try to convert to black and white. Okay, so what we're going to do then to try to use this black and white adjustment layer as a conversion tool is in the Layers panel, come down to the bottom to the little circle with the line through it, which is the Add Adjustment Layer icon, and come down about halfway or just past halfway to where it says black and white and click on that. And we've now opened and launched a black and white adjustment layer. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to, in the Properties panel, so each adjustment layer has properties associated with it. So I'm just going to walk you through what the different options are for using this black and white adjustment layer, and you can experiment to see what you like working with best. So first of all, right here we have a preset category of properties, and this is what gets produced for this image in the default. There's a little down arrow to the right here in that box, and what this shows you is there's all sorts of different presets that Adobe Photoshop comes loaded with that you can try. And so I would say if you want, just go down each of them. I'm not going to do it now for purposes of sake of time, but just try each of them if you want to, and see what they do for your image, and maybe there'll be something that you like as your one and done kind of a thing. I also want to point out, so here's my initials RA, that there's also what will come up in this presets area is you can save custom presets. So once you get your settings the way you like them, after you've made slider adjustments or whatever, then you can go to this little hamburger menu over here in the Properties panel while your black and white adjustment layer is open and click on that, and here, right here, it says Save Black and White Preset, and I'm not going to do it now, but if you click on that, it will give you the option to name and save a preset. So for instance, if you took a bunch of images, let me say I took a bunch of images in the same place but different angles or different looks, and I want to process them so they all have a common look and feel to them, that would be a good motivation to save the preset, because not only once you get a look you like, you have it, but then you get a consistency of looks across a series of images. So just something to think about. So that's the first thing you can try. Now, what I wanted to do was in this picture, when I look at it, let me look at the full color again, I see a lot of bright blues and greens, and I just know from other times I've converted black and white photos in the past that when I want to do interesting things to skies, a red filter or a blue filter seems to do kind of cool things for me on my image. So let me just, rather than going through all of these and taking that time, let's see what a blue filter does here with this image. So you can see, look at that, it brightened the sky and made this grass very dark, which I think is kind of a cool look, honestly. Now, whether you like it or not, and whether you'd like it or not for your photo, just you have to experiment. So here's another preset that has the blue filter in it. And I like this even more. I actually love this look. So for me, this is a really cool, very artistic, because again, my focus in this channel is fine art photography. So I really like this kind of look. I think this is cool. And then, as I said, reds tend to do interesting things for skies too in pictures. So I'm going to look at this one because this has a red in it. Now this too is very cool to me. I like the completely different look, but I like the look of this a lot. And there's a pure red filter, so let's just see. I like the more dramatic ones for this picture, but I'm not going to stay with those right now. I just wanted to show you how to work with the presets. Now, moving down in this properties panel for the black and white adjustment layer, next thing we see is there's a little auto button right here, so you can also try clicking on that and see what it does. And you can see it's made it much more of a smoother, full spectrum kind of a black and white conversion. And what that auto button there does in the properties panel for black and white adjustment layer is it selects a grayscale option that's based on the color tones in your image. And that's why I say it's important to have a variety of color tones, because otherwise it's just going to be all monotone in a bad way. It's just going to be a unitone, let me put it that way. It's not going to look good. So anyway, try that, and that's a good way to sort of test and see what your image will look like. And if you want maybe a less dramatic look, or more natural rather than a super fine art look, then that might be the way to go. You just experiment for your image. And then the final thing I want to show you here is then there's all these color sliders that you can move to taste. And it's things like this, which is why I told you to use these adjustment layer conversion methods versus that image adjustment desaturate, because now you have the flexibility to change all these color channels in your image. So let's just experiment here a little bit and see what can happen if I start moving these sliders around from kind of the defaults. And like I said, red seems to make things darker, so I'm going to pull this more to the left and see what I can do with this. All right, that darkened up some of the area in here. I'm going to move down to the yellow, so I'm just going to go through each of these sliders and see what happens here. All right, so that's darkening the grass. So I'm trying to hit a happy medium. That's pretty good. Oh, one thing I want to tell you about. So if you click in this box with the box that shows the value for where the slider is, just do a single click, you can use your up and down arrow keys. See what's happening if you watch that number in the box? To go up and down, and it makes it a lot easier to get granular changes. I think if you do the same thing and position that in there and then hit the shift and the up and down arrow keys, you can hop in increments of tens. So I usually start by sliding the sliders, and then if I'm just missing the mark of where I like the look, then I'll switch to using the up and down arrow keys with that value box activated. Okay, let's move down to the greens and see what I want to do with them. Okay, greens. Okay, the grass is getting darker. I still want to keep some definition for the greens. There, I think that's enough because it's dark, but you still see that there's grass and texture in there, which is what I'm trying to keep, so you know my rationale. Okay, let's go to the cyans, and I assume this will do something to the sky since we've got the cyans. Yeah, so if you watch the sky rather than my slider, you can see, and I really liked that very dramatic sky, so I'm going to take this all the way down. And then next is the blues. So again, this should either do more to the sky or anywhere where the sky might be reflecting on any objects in your scene. And I'm going to pull this up a little bit, just so we don't totally block up the shadows where the sky is. Yeah, that's okay in there because we're not then losing any of the tails on the clouds and stuff like that. And because this scene didn't have any, sometimes in the skies you get magentas. I didn't seem to see that there, but we can just slide this and see. Yeah, so I'm not seeing any, so I just leave it in the, around them roughly in the middle if I'm not seeing any change. So for me, this might not be your taste, but I really like this dramatic sort of black and white look from the color. There we go, to the black and white. And the reason I like it is that I want the focus, as I said, you want your subject to be paramount or to be really grabbing attention in a black and white. So to me, this puts the viewer's eye right into this area here, which is where I think the interest is in the scene. So that to me is where I'm going to leave it, and I feel good with it there. So for your image, just play with those sliders till you get a look that you like. Now, one thing I skipped over here in the properties panel for the black and white adjustment panel and layer is this little thing that says tint. And as I said earlier at the beginning with the definitions, a black and white is also a monochrome. But so if you want to add a single color overlay, you can still make it a monochrome. So if you click tint to turn that on, here we end up with something that's sort of sepia-ish. It's a little yellowish. But if you click in the center of this color picker box, then you can go here and pick any color that you like as a tint for your image. So this still would be a monochrome, and I'm not going to do that, and I'm going to turn this off. But if you want to stay at the black and white, you can. If you want to add this color tint overlay to make it a colored monochrome and not a black and white, then you can do that here within the black and white adjustment layer. Okay, so that is demo number 1, and that was using a black and white adjustment layer. So in the next demo, let me move to this next image. I'm going to use a portrait, and let me click on this. As always, I have my background layer duplicated, so I'm not working on the original image. And the way I do that, let me just throw this away to show you, is I drag my background layer down to this little icon at the bottom of the layers panel, that's the square with the plus in it, to add a new layer, and then you get the duplicate there. Okay, so again, we have this picture, this cute picture in color, and this one I didn't shoot. I don't typically shoot portraits, so this is a stock photo, and if I knew whose it was, I would give them credit. But I just wanted to demonstrate something on a portrait because a lot of people do shoot portraits. And let me start again with saying, okay, why did I pick this portrait as something that I want to convert from color to black and white, and why do I think it will work? So again, what I'm seeing in this color image is different color tonal variety. So we have lights, we have something in the mid-tone areas, there's brighter, there's very darks, there's different color tones in this. So I think from that perspective, it holds potential to be a good black and white conversion. There's quite a bit of saturation, I think, in this image. So in my mind, it makes me think that it will help Photoshop make the tonal conversions even better and make it easier for Photoshop to make the tonal conversion. And then the other thing is we have, as I said, unlike that equestrian picture where there's just too much detail and it was all the same level of sharpness and detail and depth of field, this we have a nice distinct subject or set of subjects right here in the foreground, and then we have this soft bokeh here, so they stand out from the background. So I think this is going to make a pretty good black and white conversion kind of an image. Okay, so with this image open, the first thing we're going to do before I show you the tool is go down to the bottom of your toolbar and make sure that your color pickers are sent to their default. Okay, so you want to make sure that the black is in the foreground and the white is in the background. And if it's not, you can click on this little icon right here that looks like a black and white, and that's what will set your, if you have colors there because you were using colors previously, it will set you to a black and white. If for some reason you end up with the white in the front, so let me just show you this little two-headed arrow there that right next to the indicator will switch you between the foreground and the background color. So you can do that, or you can use the X key on your keyboard, and if you watch this color picker as I'm hitting the X key, you can see. So what you want to do for this method I'm going to show you next is have this set, color pickers set to black as the foreground and white as the background. Okay, the next thing you're going to do is add a gradient map adjustment layer. So we're going to come down to the bottom of our layers panel to the circle with the line, which is add adjustment layer, come almost all the way down to the bottom, and where it says gradient map, you click on that. And we have a conversion from the color to the black and white, and the gradient map approach in the properties panel that it's using is the straight black and white, because that's what we set as our colors. So just as an FYI, if you want to split tone and use different colors, if you do set different colors here, then it will use those colors. But since we're converting to black and white, let me not go off topic here. So it's using a straight black and white method. Okay, now let me just again explain some of the things that are in the properties for this gradient map adjustment layer. So first of all, what it's doing is it's based on the brightness values or the tones of the colors in your image. It's replacing them with black and white and shades of gray. So as I told you when I talked through the colors before, let me see if I can get this to show. There you go. The colors. Remember I was pointing out which were the highlights, which were the midtones, and which were the shadows. That's what this has done. It's replaced those color values with black and white and shades of gray. If we move down here, you'll see that the method that it's using, the interpolation method it's using for doing that assignment of colors, is called perceptual, and that's the default. If you come across to this little down arrow, you see there are other options. There's perceptual, there's linear, and there's classic. And perceptual, I think, is usually the default. I will generally try to work with either perceptual or linear because they are the closest to how the human eye views things. They provide smoother transitions between colors that make up this gradient. So I think for me, I like to work with something that is a smoother transition and not harsh, distinctive lines between colors. Classic will give you a much harsher look. If we look just to experiment at linear, see, this is giving you a lot softer look to this. So I'm going to stick with perceptual to do this initial conversion for this image. Okay. The other thing that we see here in the properties are these two little terms with boxes next to them. The first one is dither and the other is reverse. So reverse will move, let me see if I can get it to do it. There you go. That's if you want a negative look, that's sort of going to give it to you. What reverse does is it moves the gradient colors that are used for the highlights to the shadows and vice versa. So it basically flips where the tones are being applied. What dither does is it will add noise to hide any banding that might be appearing between the colors and the gradients. So I always leave these turned off. For what I do, I don't use them. So if you find you want to experiment with them and see if it helps you, then play with it and see what you can achieve with it. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do with this gradient map adjustment layer. That was all I needed it for, was to make that initial conversion. So next I'm going to come back down again to the bottom of my layers panel to that add adjustment layer icon, And I'm going right below Gradient Map to Selective Color, and I'm going to click on that. And now I've added a Selective Color adjustment layer. And for me, what this layer will do is it will provide a way to subtly adjust and enhance the colors and the tones in my image. And you can do it on a channel basis, an individual channel basis. So since we're working with a black and white image and converting to a black and white image, I'm just only going to be working with the whites, the neutrals, and the blacks. And so if we look in the properties panel here down at the bottom for the select, so as I said, for each adjustment layer there are properties. So if we look at the properties panel for the selective color adjustment layer and then look at the colors, come over here, use the drop down menu. I am only going to be working with the whites, the neutrals, and the blacks because I don't want this in color and I don't want a color tone on this image. Okay. And when we come over here, again, because I don't want colors, I'm only going to work with the black. So how much darkness, let me do it to the left, and lightness I want in those different tones. Okay, hopefully this is clear. We'll see as we go along here. So let me start. So if I want to brighten the whites in this image, because again, I'm only going to work with the neutral colors, and I click on white. So the white should appear as the color that we're going to work with. I want to brighten it. I'm only going to work with the black slider because again, I don't want to add colors or tones or tints. So because I want to brighten this, and black would make it more black if we go to the right, I'm going to come to less. I want less black. So watch the image. Let's see if that's, yep, okay. So start in the middle and watch the image. So I'm going to the left because I want less black in this. That's a black slider. And I'm going to keep going here. I want to keep details. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Okay, so for the whites in the image, I've taken any kind of blacker tones that might be in them out, not completely, but to minus 78%, so that I am making this a brighter image. Okay, so next we want to work with the midtones. So I'm going to come back here to my colors area in the properties panel, and I'm going to come and start clicking on the neutrals. And we're still on the same selective color layer, but now we're working with the neutrals. And the same thing, I want to brighten up the midtones a bit because we've got some darker colors in here. And again, we're only going to work with the black slider, and we want less blacks in those neutrals. So I'm going to pull it to the left because less black left, more black right. And you can watch the image and see, because the numbers I'm doing don't really matter for you because you're not going to work, but hopefully you see. Let me see, yeah. All right, so we're getting brighter here. I'm going to stay right about in there because I think I want this to be a more dramatic sort of an image. Okay, and then finally, I think these are kind of harsh blacks, so I think in films and movies, I think in old-time looking pictures, sometimes what they do is soften the blacks just to make them look a little more classic. And so I think I'm going to do that too. So clicking next to the colors, I'm going to pick the blacks next, and then come back down to the black slider, and just very slightly, I think, lower the blacks. Yeah, see what it does? It adds a haze, and I don't want it to get that hazy. I just want to soften it a little bit. Okay, so for me, I think that is good. Now, this is still a pretty dramatic image, and it may not be your taste, so you have to do the images to your taste. But what I will often do is, if I've done this and I still want to alter some areas of the tonality image, of the image, what I will do is I'll add a curves adjustment layer. You could do it with levels too, but let me just try it with curves and see what happens here. So again, bottom of the layers panel, add adjustment layer with the circle with the line through it, and I'm coming partway down to where it says curves, and I'm going to click on that. So we've added a curves layer. And I like to selectively brighten or darken parts of the image on the image itself. So I see this little hand tool in the properties panel for the curves adjustment layer. There's this little hand that looks like a finger is pointing, and that's the on image adjustment tool. So for instance, if his hair is still looking a little darker, I'd like to get it more of a blondie look. With that tool active, I'll click in this area and then I'll pull slightly up to brighten up that area. And you can see I'm getting a more blonde look. And what it's doing, if you look over here just for a moment at the properties panel, is where I click, it's putting a dot onto the curve. And so if I pull the curve up, you'll see it's heading towards the lighter colors. If I pull the curve down, it's heading towards the darks. So if I'm pulling up, it's simulating pulling up on the curve, which is brightening some of the things. So again, if her hair is a little bright, I might try to brighten that up a little bit. If his arm is a little bit dark, try to maybe do some of that. If this is getting a little too light over here and becomes a distraction, okay, we can pull it down. All right, so I established a point there. I got to the point I wanted. I clicked and held my left mouse button and I just pulled down to darken, or I clicked and pulled up to brighten. Okay, now because that's working globally on this image, and you know that because you can see on the curves layer we have a white mask, so that means anything I do on this layer is going to show, because in Photoshop white shows everything and black hides everything. If there was a white mask, it shows everything. If there's a black mask, it hides everything. So what I want to do is convert this white mask to a black mask. So clicking on the mask, make sure there's a little white frame around it to say that the mask is active. And then for the properties panel, for the curves, we come down to the bottom, and where it says invert, you click on that. And it has changed the mask to black. So now it's hiding those curves adjustments I've just made, because it only works on the image that you're working on. If you want to bring back selectively the changes that were made, then you leave the mask active, you click on your brush tool from your toolbar, come down to your color picker and make sure that white is in the foreground, because you're going to be painting with white on a black mask. And if you do that, wherever you paint white, it's going to show, and the rest will be remain hidden. And then just adjust your brush size. I'm not going to bother doing that. You can see inside my highlighter, which shows you where my cursor is, that black circle is the size of my brush. I can make it smaller or larger. Okay, so since I lightened his hair, I want to paint with white in his hair to make that a little bit dry, and I want to lighten up his face a little bit because he's kind of shadowed. Same thing with her hair and the shadows in her face. I want to make sure that we get some nice, cute, bright, visible. So anywhere where I am painting right now, I am painting with white on a black mask, so I am revealing the curves adjustment just in those selective places. And I want this a little darker, so make this a little brighter so the darkness of them stands out. I'm not going to come all the way down to the corner, because what that is creating is kind of a nice simulated vignette that keeps your eyes coming into the image. Okay, and I'm not going to spend too much time, but the point is to show you. And then typically when I do a mask, I will come to my properties panel and feather it a little bit, just so that where I've painted is a little bit softer. But the point is to show you that to make this kind of color to black and white conversion started with the gradient map, and you had to have it set so that at the bottom of your tools bar you have the black as the foreground and the white as the background color. After you do that, then you launch your gradient map layer. From there, you make your selective color adjustment layer active, so click on that to open that. Make whatever adjustments you wanted to make to the whites, the neutrals, and the blacks, and only work on your black slider. And then if it's still not where you want it to be and you want to make some additional tonal adjustments, then you can add a curves adjustment layer from your adjustment layer options, or you can use levels too and do it with levels if you prefer working with levels. But so that's method number 2 that I wanted to show you in terms of types of tools that we have available to us in Photoshop for converting from color to black and white. And then my third demo, and this will be the final set of tools that I wanted to show you. And in this demo, I'm going to work with a landscape shot of mine from a nearby salt pond. And again, what I want to do before I do anything is duplicate my background layer by dragging it down to the Add Layer icon, which is the square with the plus sign, so we can work on the duplicate. And I want to do the same thing I did with the other images, which is to assess why I think this will work for me to do a conversion from color to black and white. And again, we have different tones, color tones here, as well as different color hues. We have some very distinct shapes like that the salt ponds have formed, and the landscape is divided into very distinct shapes. We have the birds flying here in the clouds, which are distinct shapes. We have shadows and light from the sunbeams or the moonbeams, as the case may be. And there's an absence of busy details. I mean, there's not a ton of details that are all going to mush together in this image, I don't think. And again, keeping in mind that the focus is for fine art photography, so I personally, in the look that I typically like to create, head towards the low-key, darker look to my images. So if yours tends to be more high-key and bright, or softer and more pastel, you have to do what you want to do in terms of the look you create. I'm just showing you how to use the tools, and then you get the look you want. You're not going to end up with a super dark picture just because that's what I'm doing in mine. Okay, so now that we've assessed why I think this should work, what we're going to do is go to our Layers panel, come down to the bottom to Add Adjustment Layer, and we're going to pick the channel mixer. And where can I find the channel mixer? It's about 2/3 of the way down. So there it is right there. Click on that, and we've opened a channel mixer adjustment layer. And what this channel mixer does is, rather than working with an individual color channel, so like if you click here, you see channels, and then you can work with them individually. This lets you work with all of the different channels, the red, the green, and the blue, the RGB, as a group, and you can adjust them to your taste to adjust the tones in the image. So what we want to do is, in the Properties panel for the Channel Mixer adjustment layer, first what you want to do is come down here and go to where it says Monochrome and check that to on. Okay, so now we've got our initial conversion from color to a black and white image. Next, we'll do what we did in the black and white adjustment layer, and you can check in the Properties panel and look at the presets and see with the down arrow what options there are available. And so again, there's a number of presets that come bundled with Photoshop, and you probably can download more from the web too. I haven't honestly done that, but you can experiment for your image with some of these different presets and see if any of them suit your image. And again, that's sort of the one and done if you find something that you like. And then I also want to point out that in this presets box with the pull down menu, I have saved a custom preset. So it's the same thing as I showed you before. If after you get all your settings together, you want to create your own preset that you might want to apply to a number of images that were taken at the same time but different scenes in the same light or something, then you'd just go to, in the properties panel, this little hamburger menu here on the upper right, and you can save a channel mixer preset right there. So again, I'm not going to do it now, but if you click on that, it'll pop up a pop-up box and it will let you name your preset, and then once you name it, this is where it will show up and you can easily access it for your future images, and I'll save you a ton of time if you want the same kind of look. Okay, so that's that as far as using the presets. Now, the next thing that you can do is manually change the different red, green, and blue channels to your taste. And I think I already showed you the same thing works the same way here. So if you check into this little values boxes that you see here with the numbers, then you can use your up and down arrow keys to increase them or decrease them by a single percent. And if you press and hold shift and then use the up and down arrow keys with that cursor active blinking there in that value box, then you can hop by 10% at a time, or you can just pull the sliders. So it just, depends on what you want to do. Now, if you want your image to keep the same brightness levels in the monochrome version that it has in your color original, what you need to be sure to do is make sure that your percent values for the red, green, and blue channels add up to 100%. You certainly can alter it and go for a much more distinctive look if you want. There's no law that says it has to add up to 100, but if you do want it to maintain the same brightness levels, then just balance. You'll have to keep moving around. If you're as good as higher math as I am, which is not very good, then you'll have to keep experimenting to keep the numbers adding up to 100%. Okay, so let me start experimenting here and seeing what we get with these different sliders, working with them here. So first I'm going to work with the red slider and see what that's. Okay, so moving to the right, so you can see moving to the left with the red will make it darker. Moving to the right with the red slider will make the tones that the red is affecting lighter. So I want to go to the right because I want to bring out some of the highlights in this image. Yeah, I got too bright and it blew out my highlights. So, all right, I think I'm going to avail myself of the click in here so I can move more subtly. You can watch the image as opposed to my numbers because, yeah. So what I'm trying to do is get brightness but not totally blow out the image. So for now, until I see if I want to balance some more, I've introduced some more brightness where the red tones were being affected and the red channels being affected. So now I'm going to go on to the green channel. And I think same thing. I think wherever, some of these things are blocked up a little bit in the greens, I want to try to brighten that up. So I might actually go pretty close to where, yeah, see, look at that. Look what that sky did. So that just totally blew out. And this might be too much, but I'm going to click here and use my up arrow. Just, all right. So for now, I'm going to leave that there, but I may end up changing this. All right, and now I want to work with the blue channel. So blue slider. So this has gotten way too blown out and bright. And again, because we're dealing with skies, I'm thinking that making it darker blue is going to make it more dramatic and fine art-y looking. So I'm going to start pulling this to the left, yeah, see, to compensate for all that brightness that I added. That's too much. All right. Where do I want to be? That might be still a little dark. All right, I'm going to go back to my singles so I can play more singly and see what I'm doing here. That's getting darker. All right, let me stay there because that's more of a full spectrum kind of a look. Okay, so I've gotten my red, green, and blue channels set to the percents where I'm feeling pretty good with this, but what's happened is that if you look at my percents over here in the properties panel, they're adding up to 115. And what I said was is you should try to add to 100% if you want your highlights and shadows to kind of match the brightness level of your original color image. So that's where you can start playing with this constant slider. And what that constant slider does is it affects the darkness if you move it left and the brightness if you move it right. And as I said, I tend to like more low key, so I'm probably going to default more left in what I'm doing. But the other way you can use it is like a reciprocity thing. So I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of reciprocity when you're capturing photos, and that you can move your aperture in different settings to different numbers that'll give you essentially the same thing but at different settings. So the same thing works here. So because I've gone up to 115 and I'm 15% over 100%, I can use this constant slider to offset that by going down negative 15%. Oops, I'm going to click here because it's going to be too hard for me to. There we go. So now I've made this as dark as the look that I like for my personal taste and what I do in my images typically. And again, you don't have to go this dark in yours. You go where you want to go with the look. But what I've done is offset this plus 15% that's over 100 by doing a minus. So a plus and a minus equals out to essentially 100%. So that's what I use that constant slider for. Now you can pull it even beyond that if you want a more dramatic look one way or another. But since I've explained what it does, I will just leave it there as far as demo purposes and let you play with it now that you know what these different things do. Now, what I've found sometimes happens with this channel mixer is that sometimes the images can end up looking a little bit on the flat side, and they don't have as much dimensionality as I'd like for them to have. So almost like what we just did in the previous tool where I added the curves layer just to further adjust some of the tonality. This time I'm going to see what happens if we come down to the bottom of the layers panel to the new adjustment layer and add a levels adjustment layer. So we've got a levels adjustment there now. And you see you've got your histogram for this image and the way it looks. And you can see it's skewing way left because I pulled everything way left. But the way I would normally check to be sure that I have a pure black point, which would be the far left of the histogram, and a pure white point, which is the far right of the histogram, is I'm on a PC, so I press and hold the Alt. If you're on a Mac, press and hold the Option. So Option or Alt, keep it depressed, and with your cursor or whatever you're using, click on this little slider. See, and there's no pure white there right now. It's black. And that's why you're pressing that Alt or Option, is to help you see this. And while you have that Alt Option pressed and you're clicked on the slider, slowly move it towards the left. And as soon as you get a little hint of white there, then you can release it. And what that's telling you is that now there is a pure white point in your image. And it will usually, if you get those pure whites and blacks, that's when you get the dimension. And then I'll do the same thing. I'll press and hold the Alt, and you do the Option on a Mac, and I'll click on this little slider. Now there's plenty of black point there because I pulled it with black, so we don't need to do anything with that. What you can also do is with the midpoint, and I'm not gonna, well, maybe I'll move it just to show you. You can pull it to the right if you want to darken it more. Oh, I actually like that. Or you can pull it to the left if you want to soften it up. So if you want to adjust your midtones, then you would drag to the right to darken, drag to the left to soften it up. So I'm going to leave this here for now, but so again, that was using the channel mixer adjustment layer and then adding a levels layer on top just to, if you feel your image still needs some dimension after using the channel mixer. But that channel mixer is cool in terms of letting you work with all three RGB colored channels at the same time. So again, just something to think about in terms of tools that you might want to experiment with. So I don't typically save my images in these demos, but when I do save, I always will add a suffix of BW for black and white and a version number to the ends of my file names. So I'll flatten them, and then at the end of the file name, I'll put a dash BW and then the file number or the attempt number. So if I do different interpretations of the same picture, then I know that each one is numbered differently, and it just helps me to spot which of my images are black and white when I scan down the file name. So just something for you to think about. It's not necessary to do that for sure. Anyway, I hope there was some method of color to black and white photo conversion that you found useful or helpful that you'd like to try, or try them all and see which one you like working with best in the set of 3 that I used today. And if you would like to be automatically alerted when I add new content to my channel, which is only like 1 to 2 times per month, then please hit the subscribe button below the video. It's free, and I don't do any kind of marketing or marketing emails, and I definitely don't share subscriber information with anyone. So you would just get a single alert when I do post new content if you're interested. Anyway, take care, and I hope you have fun converting your color images to black and white.